Okay, great. So at the end of Professor Acemoglu's talk, we'll move on to a Q&A session, which will last around 15 to 20 minutes. I'll first give the option for anyone to ask a question live. So you can do this by raising your virtual hand and I will unmute you and you'll be able to ask your question yourself. Alternatively, if you would like me to ask a question for you, you can write a question at any point during the webinar by typing it into the Q&A window, which you can find at the lower bar of your screen. And just to clarify, this is not the chat, so please put all your questions into the Q&A function using the Q&A button specifically. This function also enables you to upvote any questions, making it more likely for them to be asked. Yeah, so moving on to the event now. We are also very grateful to have with us Professor Antonio Guarino from UCL's Department of Economics, who has very kindly accepted to introduce our world-renowned speaker for us today. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Professor Guarino.
Thank you, Maha. In fact, it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Acemoglu, and I would like to thank him for accepting the offer. And I would also like to thank the Economist Society on behalf of the department for all the amazing work that you do. And this event is a wonderful event that we should be all proud of. But again, thank you, Daron, for accepting. What can I say about Professor Acemoglu? He's one of the most prominent economists in the world. He spans an entire set of research areas, from political economy to development to growth to economic theory to labor to networks to social learning to financial contagion, you name it. And in all these areas, Daron has given very, very important contributions. I must say that Daron didn't start super well, because he did his master and PhD at the London School of Economics and not at UCL. So, Daron, I don't know what you would have done if you started in the right way, but nevertheless, you did extremely well, I must admit. And I think I really would like to hand over to Daron for this event. And when I asked you and my colleagues what is Daron going to talk about, I really didn't know, because he can talk about so many things. Sometimes you already know in advance what the topic more or less could be, but not in the case of Daron, because he really has so many different interests. And so today he will talk to us about something on which he has been working for quite a while, which is automation and the inappropriateness of the 21st century technology. And we all want to know where this inappropriateness is, Daron. So please, this is up to you. And thank you again for accepting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Antonio, for that wonderful introduction. I was going to say myself that I have graduated from your sister institution, but UCL was the first place where I gave a talk. So I do have links with UCL. Perhaps those rubbed on me at the time. So it's a great honor to be addressing, budding, promising economists who are soon going to join our world of professional economists. And I'm going to talk about automation and the inappropriateness of 21st century technology. As Antonio already noticed, one part of this title is a bit mysterious. What do I mean by the inappropriateness of 21st century technology? Well, I'm not going to tell you until a little bit later. But the first word, automation, of course, you know. So I'm going to talk about automation and inequality a little bit, and then I'll come and explain where this title is coming from. So there have been major shifts against labor in many advanced economies. Throughout this talk, I'll show you more US data, but it's also some international and UK data. But just starting from the US, the gray curve here shows that since 2000, The labor share in national income went down from around 68% to just over 60%, a huge decline. And if you actually do composition adjusted, because different industries have different labor shares, actually the decline is even larger. There have been many explanations about this important changes, intangible capital, other types of capital deepening, markups, monopsony, but I'm going to argue that it's actually very closely connected to automation. Before I get there, let me underscore the sweeping changes that have accompanied the decline in labor share. In the US, for example, there has been a huge increase in inequality, and it has really taken the form of a very non-shared form of economic growth. You can see that from these two pictures, which show for men and women, and for 5 demographic groups, for education groups, going for all the way from less than high school degree to postgraduate degree, evolution of real wages. And what you can see is that in the 1960s and early 70s, and the same was true in the 1950s using other data sources, growth was very shared. All of these 10 demographic groups, each one of them experienced about 2% or above, slightly over 2% growth in real wages. But then since 1980, you see much greater inequality as demonstrated by the fanning out of the top and the bottom. Stagnant median wages, which you can get a clue from the fact that the light blue here, which is men with a college degree but no postgraduate degree, have seen almost no gain in their real wages from the mid 1970s. And third, real wages of some demographic groups, such as high school educated or less than high school educated men and less than high school educated women, have fallen very, very sharply. This inequality, therefore, is much more pernicious than just the top growing faster than the bottom. It's really the top growing and the bottom shrinking. Inequality is not just a US phenomenon. US was the leader in inequality, for example, as measured by the Gini coefficient, and has had one of the largest increases since the 1980s. But many other countries, including the UK, have had very large increases. New Zealand, Sweden, Germany. And some of these countries even had the same pattern of low education men losing, including in Germany and the UK. Giving some more clues about what's going on here, there have been other common changes across countries. One that is quite notable is that the middle class jobs are much less common today than they used to be. And here by middle class jobs, I mean occupations that are in the middle of the earning distribution, not managers, not CEOs, not doctors, and not cleaning staff, not protection workers, but blue collar workers, operators, welders, painters, construction workers, clerical, back office workers, sales workers. Those are this dark red bars, and you see that in all advanced economies they have shrunk. So there are many fewer of these. In some places they have been replaced by more skilled jobs, especially where there has been a lot of educational upgrading, technicians, engineers, but in many places this has also gone hand in hand with many more jobs at the bottom of the earnings distribution. These changes have many causes. Institutional changes, globalization, but I'm going to argue and provide evidence that they are also related to automation. So the question is, how do we think about automation? Well, how do we think about new technologies? Economists typically think of technology as something that makes workers more productive. In fact, it's the celebrated approach in macroeconomics that you want to model technological changes, labor augmenting, meaning making labor more productive for a variety of reasons of matching certain long-run phenomena. And some of you may have been exposed to this. But more generally, the way that economists think of technology is very much linked with productivity increases. Mea culpa, this is also the way that I used to think about it. In fact, a lot of my early writing was based on that. But now I have come to believe that that's a very inadequate way of thinking about technology. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually go through a conceptual framework for thinking about technology, which is going to be important for the rest of our discussion, both in understanding labor share changes, inequality, and what I mean by inappropriateness of technology. And to understand what I'm going to talk about, it may be useful to have something concrete in mind. So let's think a very concrete problem, producing a piece of garment, like a t-shirt. Okay, so how do we produce a t-shirt? Well, normally we would just have a black box technology. You put labor, perhaps managerial labor, as well as production workers and capital, and whoops, comes out a t-shirt. Well, actually, much more realistic would be to think of what are the steps that are necessary for producing a t-shirt. Let's call them tasks. So there are a bunch of tasks that you need to complete. First of all, you need to spin the yarn and produce the yarn that's going to be produced, and that probably is a couple of different types of yarns that are going to be used for even a simple t-shirt or a shirt. Then there is those are the spinning tasks. Then you need to start with a design. That becomes very important in modern production. Then you need to do the weaving based on the design. You need to do other chemical processes, coloring, dyeing, and other chemical processes are going to be applied to actually get the final product. But that's not even the end. And then they need to be transported, wholesaled, retailed, and then finally it reaches the consumer. So all of these tasks need to be performed, and a critical part of the production process is which tasks are going to be performed by which workers. So it could be different skill groups as well as different types of capital. So that's what I'm going to start with, and I'm not going to impose many equations on you, only this slide and one more slide, and it's optional. You can skip this slide because I'm going to show you exactly the same thing in a figure in a second. But for those of you who want to link this to some of your econ courses, perhaps this slide is useful. So I'm just putting now in math what I said, which is that we're going to produce output. And to do that, we need to perform certain tasks or task services. This is what's known as a CES with an elasticity of substitution sigma. So think of this sigma as a number less than 1, which means that you really need all of these tasks. And then this range here goes from n minus 1 to n. So there's a measure of tasks normalized to 1. Each task can be allocated to different factors, and for simplicity, let me take these factors to be capital and labor. And moreover, suppose that only tasks below I have been technologically automated, meaning that those are the only ones we know where we can use capital. So before the Industrial Revolution, for example, there was no way you could have used capital without labor for spinning and weaving. And the heart of Industrial Revolution were actually these advances in spinning and weaving machinery that really got it all started in the UK. Those tasks above I, you cannot produce them with capital, so only labor. So which means you have to assign some labor. Labor has some productivity. This AL is uniform increase in productivity. That's normally what economists that's normally what economists do for modeling technological change. So I'm allowing for that. But then there is this new element here, which is this task-specific technology. So gamma L Z for task Z. But for those tasks which are automated, you can either assign it to labor or capital. And then there's also a capital productivity, gamma KZ and AK. All right, that's it. That's the math. So now let's look at the figure. And here is the task space again. And on the vertical axis, I put the cost of production. For labor, the cost of production is W, the wage that you have to pay to a worker, since there's only one type of worker, divided by the productivity of the worker in that task. For capital is the user cost of capital, R, divided by the productivity of capital in that task. Capital only comes up to I because those tasks, we cannot produce them with capital. We haven't invented a way of doing so. And then the problem of the firm is to choose a lower envelope. Follow up the way up the orange one up to here, and then the green or the blue one. All right, so now how do we think of technological progress using this figure? So let's go first to the ones that are very common in economics. AL, labor augmenting technological change. That's the classic one that you would have learned in any macro or growth courses or even micro courses. So if you do that, you get a shift like this. The denominator increases, everything is more productive when you're done with labor. Now, there are two things that are quite peculiar about this, actually, when you think about it this way. First, if you want to come up with examples of specific technologies that makes labor more productive in all the tasks, like this AL, you won't be able to do that. Most specific technologies only help labor in some specific tasks. If you have a hammer that makes you better at nailing nails, but it doesn't make you a better cook or a better lecturer. So AL is not descriptively very realistic, but perhaps it still gives us the right comparative static. Well, I'm going to argue it doesn't actually. And the reason for that is another feature that you can already see in this picture. It creates a huge productivity effect. That blue area is the productivity increase from an increase in AL. And because it makes labor more productive in all the tasks, that productivity integral is huge. Same thing with capital augmenting technology. If we make capital more productive, so if you think that, for example, robots are making capital more productive, that would also lead to a huge productivity effect. Now, the red area, it doesn't extend beyond I, but it's still the same idea. Now, I will submit to you that neither of these is very realistic. And in fact, automation, by which economists mean the substitution of machines or algorithms for tasks previously performed by labor, does not correspond to either of them. Automation is not making capital more productive in the tasks that it was already producing. It's taking away tasks from labor. So in this figure, here is what automation looks like. This curve shifts from here to here, I prime. Now, two very different features than what you have seen already, or what you have seen with the labor and capital augmenting technologies. One, there is a direct displacement here. For example, now robots may become better at welding. So all of these workers here who used to work in welding tasks, they're going to get displaced because robots are going to take over these tasks. Second, the productivity effect now, instead of a huge rectangular shape, is given by a small triangle. In fact, I could make this blue curve very close to the orange curve, so this triangle could be tiny. In about half an hour, I'm going to show you that, in fact, it could be negative. So the productivity effects are very limited. That's not all the types of technological change. There are others, but one other one that I want to emphasize, for reasons you'll see in a second, is that we could also add new tasks. We could add new labor-intensive tasks, so we could extend this here. And if you think about it, almost all of you, when you graduate, regardless of the exact field that you end up in, you're going to be performing tasks that did not exist 80 years ago. Even as a professor, yeah, sure, professors have existed for 400 years, but most of the things that I do were not performed by professors, 40, 50, 60 years ago. So these new tasks are actually quite important empirically, and I'll show you why they're important conceptually as well. All right. So one more slide of equations, but again, the basic ideas are very simple, so you can ignore the Greek and just look at the words. So how do we think of the equilibrium here? Well, I'm not going to go into the details, but all I want to point out is that if you solve this model and aggregate it up, you can again think of output being produced from labor and capital. But what it gives you is that it gives you these new terms that did not exist in the neoclassical, the most standard production function. And these are about exactly the thing that I showed you here, which is the allocation of tasks to factors. So these orange terms capture which tasks go to capital and which tasks go to labor. That's why this integral is from I to N, and this integral is from the bottom to I. And one more point, the labor share is really important in this framework, or actually in many frameworks. And that's the reason why I started with it. It's almost like a sufficient statistic of how technology is going to impact the allocations and other outcomes in the labor market. And if you look at the labor share, it really consists of two types of terms. The blue terms are the ones that existed in the classical, neoclassical model and existing stories. And the orange terms that are the new ones that have been added because of this allocation of factors to, or allocation of tasks to factors. And in particular, they capture how technological changes impact the task content of production, how the task content of labor versus the task content of capital are affected. In particular, if the sigma here is close to 1, which most estimates put it not too far from 1, these blue terms are not going to be very large. So you're not going to get big effects on the labor share from, say, AL changes or other changes. For example, bargaining or credit market imperfections that might affect the cost of capital. They're not going to matter too much for the labor share. They'll have an effect, but quantitatively small. On the other hand, these orange terms can be very large. And in fact, you can think of this orange term approximately as n minus I, meaning when you increase I and when you automate, this orange term, the gamma goes down, the labor share goes down, but this n, an increase in new tasks, increases the labor share. Well, why is that new task an emphasis here? Very simple. If, as I'm going to claim, automation has been going on for 2.5 centuries very rapidly, or at least, non-trivially, then that means that the labor share is going to go down, especially if these blue terms are not very important, which I've also implied. So then we should have been seeing a steady secular decline in the labor share over the last 250 years, and that's not what we see. There are many periods, including much of 20th century, where the labor share was fairly constant in almost all advanced economies. The reason for that is because at the same time as we automate, we also create new tasks, as I've just said. We have a lot of new tasks relative to 50, 60, 70 years ago. So in some sense, if you want to think about the labor share, and I'll come back and I amplify this point, it's a race between new tasks and automation. Okay, so let's put all of these together. Let's think of how new technology impacts labor demand. And then I'll look at the wage level and inequality. So let me measure overall labor demand by the wage bill, how much the private sector pays to labor, average wage times employment. And that's by definition output times labor share. That's why labor share is so central for understanding labor demand. So what happens if we increase this I threshold, automation? Well, again, don't worry about the math. You can just read these. It creates a productivity effect because it's increasing output, and it creates a displacement effect because it's reducing the labor share. Now, in the standard framework where technological change makes labor more productive, under extremely weak conditions, or under weak conditions, let's say extremely perhaps is too much, but under weak conditions, technological change benefits labor. That is the reason why economists have always been very skeptical of the great British economist Keynes's claim in the 1920s that technological advances would create technological unemployment. Many economists were conditioned to think by the models and by the reading of the data that they had that anything that increases productivity ultimately is going to translate into better outcomes for labor. Well, that's not the case. The productivity effect, as I said, could be very small. So this could be 0, and we could be just left with a displacement effect, which means that you improve technology, firms make more money, firm owners, capital owners benefit, but the wage bill goes down, workers lose wages, the workers lose employment. And I'll come back to that in a second. Before I now use this framework for thinking about what happens to, what has happened to labor, let me just show you this critical object, the labor share, how it has evolved in the US. First, I want to show you the period before the surge in inequality, from 1940s to the mid-1980s. And this is in this picture, Pascual Restrepo, my collaborator on almost all of the work I'm talking about here, and I aggregate up sectoral labor shares into 6 broad categories: manufacturing, construction, services, transport, mining, and agriculture. And you see that in almost all of them, with the exception of mining from the mid-1970s, the labor share is fairly constant. In fact, in services, it's increasing. But fast forward to the period in which the labor share starts declining in the aggregate, you see a different picture. Construction, services, and transport are still fairly constant. But there's a big decline in manufacturing, a huge one, and then even a larger one in mining. So first of all, therefore, anything that is going to explain what's going on with the labor share in the US at the very least has to have a critical role for manufacturing. But in fact, I will say more. It has to have a critical role of automation. And one way of seeing that is to look at the different levels of aggregation, sectors that have experienced different evolutions of the labor share. So here, I'm looking at the percent change in the labor share across a number of sectors. The circles are non-manufacturing and the diamonds are manufacturing. And on the vertical horizontal axis, I've put the penetration of robots. I'll explain exactly what this variable is in a second in some more detail. So for now, just think of it as how much technological advances there have been in robotics in this sector. And you see that there's a very strong relationship within manufacturing, between robotics and a clear automation technology and the declines in the labor share. Non-manufacturing doesn't have robots, so those are all here. But let's look at another measure of automation, routine tasks that get automated. Now, there's a lot of automation in the offices, and that also lines up with the declines in labor share. And it's not just robots, and it's not at, about 2 to 3 digit. So here we go down to 4 to 5 digit, much more detailed within manufacturing or within a number of key manufacturing sectors. And you again have a strong relationship between automation technologies and the declines in the labor share. The other claim I made is that these are not the only types of technologies we have to think about. We also have to think about new tasks. So Pasquale and I also construct a number of measures of new tasks, in particular, new job titles or emerging tasks across industries or diversity of occupations across industries. And all of those capture different aspects of new tasks, we argue. And in all cases, the more of these new tasks you have, the higher is, or the more positive is the change in the labor share. So in other words, at least at a correlational level, there's something that says that these task automation, new tasks, are useful for understanding labor share and therefore labor demand. But the real proof of the pudding would be something closer to a causal estimate that says, well, let's look at an automation technology that's very productive, but it really hurts labor. Well, let's look at that. So that would be one example, would be robots. Not the only example, but a very clear example. Robots have been spreading rapidly in manufacturing, and they are also one of the most productive manufacturing technologies. They have led to very significant productivity gains in many industries, including auto, metals, chemicals, and so on. So what we do here is we create a measure of how different local labor markets in the United States, approximated by 722 local areas, commuting zones, are impacted by robots technology. And we do that on the basis of this robot penetration, advances in robotics technology, interacted with how important an industry is in that local area. And out of that, we create this exposure to robots for a local commuting zone. And here is the data. This actually looks extremely similar, whether or not you control for demographics, import competition, lots of other things or not. In all cases, places that have introduced more robots or have been more exposed to robots, the two are very correlated, have seen relatively notable declines in employment. This is led by, but it's not confined to, places in the heartland of the United States, like industrial heartland, Detroit, Wilmington, Lorain City, Mount Pleasant, Toledo, Lansing City, etc. So if you take out these most exposed places, instead of the solid line, you get the dashed line. So really, the relationship in this cloud is very similar to the relationship here. So this is a very strong effect that robots help firms, help exports, help profits, but they are not good news for workers. In fact, it's not just confined to employment. If you look at wages, there is an even more precise and negative effect on local wages. So this is an example, therefore, of not a technological change of the sort that lifts all boats, but creates major distributional effects. And these distributional effects are really led by middle skill workers. Workers with high school, some college, and college suffer, postgraduates don't. And even the lowest skills are not the ones that most affected. It's really the high school ones that are most affected. If you look at by wage quintiles, then really the bottom is the place where you see the most negative effects. When you go to above the 60th, 70th percentile, you don't see much of a negative effect. So they are also unequalizing. In fact, this figure here doesn't do justice to how unequalizing automation technologies are. And in more recent work, Pasquale and I use a different strategy for looking at national level changes from all automation technologies, not just robotics. And we estimate that 50 to 70% of that very large increase in inequality are accounted for by automation. And to give you one flavor of that, here is a summary from that paper. It shows that it constructs task displacement for demographic groups, for 500 demographic groups. This is on the basis of how much automation you are suffering in the occupations and industries in which you work. And you see that groups, high school graduates, for example, workers with some college, that used to be in these middle skill routine tasks in manufacturing and some non-manufacturing industries that have undergone most rapid automation, they are the ones that experience large declines in wages, and the groups that have been shielded from automation have continued to experience rather large gains in wages. This immediately raises the question of why now? As I said at the beginning, automation has been going on for 250 years at least. Why only over the last 30 years that we see these large declines in labor share and wage inequality effects from automation? To answer that question, Pasquale Restrepo and I do another exercise that really pits now automation against new tasks. So we look at the displacement suffered by labor against the reinstatement that comes from new tasks or other things that increase labor's opportunities. And everything is again in labor share units, which makes it nice to or easy to compare. And here I'm looking at the 4 decades that followed World War II. So you see a remarkable pattern here for the entire American economy, or here for manufacturing. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong picture, sorry. For the 4 decades that followed World War II. So displacement, the red, is pulling down the labor share, but it is almost perfectly counterbalanced by the blue, reinstatement. And the same is true in manufacturing as well. So much so that the sum of the two, the orange curve in the middle, is hovering around 0, indicating that labor share is remaining constant in the economy. But now come to the more recent period, you see an acceleration in displacement and a slowdown in reinstatement, so that the orange curve now goes seriously south, explaining the 10% decline in labor share that I showed you. And within manufacturing, it's much more negative, so explaining 20% decline in labor share that I showed you in manufacturing in that other figure. So there has been a change in the balance of technological change over the last 3 or 4 decades. Now, I'm going to argue it's actually worse than that, because a lot of this automation has been excessive. Now, I don't have the time, and I don't want to tax you more to go into all of the reasons why technological change can be excessive, but the basic idea is very simple. If instead of a perfect world that fits the first welfare theorem, if you have labor market imperfections or taxes or other things that distort the allocations, firms are going to make their automation decisions according to the perceived labor cost. And the perceived labor cost is often going to be greater than the real opportunity cost of labor. When that's the case, you won't stop at this point where the real opportunity cost is equal to the cost of capital. You will go all the way up to the wherever you can, but then you're adding this negative red triangle, and this negative red triangle could be smaller than the blue triangle, or the green triangle, sorry. It's a double whammy because you're not getting productivity gains, you are getting the displacement of labor, you're getting the inequality consequences, and not even the economy benefits, and labor loses out. That's the double whammy. Why excessive automation? Well, there are many reasons, but let me single out three of them. A fourth one, this labor market institutions, I'm not going to have time to talk about. Global competition from Japan and then China have made firms focus on cost cutting. And of course, labor is a very important part of costs. So firms have looked at opportunities to automate as a godsend. But even more important, my work argues that the big tech, whose business model is focused on algorithmic automation, has been responsible both for not creating opportunities within its own sector, but then its technology is spreading throughout the rest of the economy and creating a bias towards excessive automation. But on top of it, US policy has encouraged excessive automation. Let me show you one sliver of that, which is tax policy. Labor gets taxed at 25% in the US at the margin, whereas capital is now taxed at less than 5%, especially capital that's used for automation, software and equipment. So that means that if you fire labor and hire a machine for performing the same task at the same efficiency, you're going to make 20% more profits because of the tax asymmetry between capital and labor. So we're creating a lot of artificial reasons from competition, globalization, may or may not be artificial, that we can decide, but the business models of big tech and policy that pushes towards excessive automation. Now, finally, we come to the inappropriateness of technology. These technologies and this drive towards automation does not just impact advanced economies. It is having an influence throughout the entire world economy because it's changing the international division of labor and it's, of course, being exported to other countries. In that context, I claim that the right framework for thinking about this is one that a number of economists introduced in the 1970s, and it's not today very commonly taught in undergraduate or graduate courses, but it went under the name of inappropriate technology. So for example, economists like Francis Stewart argued that technologies in agriculture especially, developed in the West, were inappropriate for the conditions in the South. For one, they were too capital intensive, and Africa, Latin America, Asia did not have capital. That's the sense in which they were inappropriate. So using that framework, I will argue that what I have so far outlined makes automation, especially the next wave of automation based on AI, highly inappropriate for the South. The South does not have the capital, the designers, the engineers to implement these automation technologies. And it's rich in exactly the human resources that these technologies are explicitly targeting. And it will negatively impact billions of people in the emerging world, not just directly, but because of the international division of labor. And long ago, in the context of before automation, I had argued or shown how other forms of inappropriate technology can increase both the gap between the North and the South, or the West and the developing world, and increase inequality within these countries. So that's doubly true today. But in fact, you can push that a little bit further. If what I have outlined is correct, then these technologies are not just inappropriate for the developing world, but they're also inappropriate for the workers in the developed world, because they themselves have a lot of labor, very little capital, and many of them, those who don't have the postgraduate degrees, don't have the skills that are necessary in this automated world. So we are creating a lot of these inappropriate technologies and we're doubling down on them. And in fact, that's not the only type of technology that we can use. So one argument, or we can develop, one argument that you will hear, and this is a reaction I have gotten before, you wouldn't be surprised, is that, well, sure, we understand that technologies can be disruptive, but this is what the future of technology needs. In the words of Wired magazine founding editor Kevin Kelly, who wrote a book with this title, this is what technology wants. So somehow there's a preordained path of technology. You need genius and effort in order to climb that hill, but which hill you're going to climb is very clear. Well, I think that's completely wrong. Again, for the last 30 years, my work has been very much on how the direction of technology is endogenous, both to economic factors and social and political factors. We can use new technologies, including AI, in very different ways. Some of them are going to be good for labor. Some of them are going to be bad for labor. Some of them are going to be good for inequality. Some of them are going to be bad for inequality. And in fact, it's not even true that we are using those technologies, despite all that we hear from Silicon Valley tycoons, for the best way in productivity. Today, we are going through one of the slowest periods of productivity growth of the last 200 years in the Western world. So where are the productivity dividends of these amazing technologies? Nobody has been able to answer that question. And there are many ways in which we can develop them differently. Let me give you one example. Actually, I'm going to give you two more examples, and I'm going to conclude with these two examples. First, let me take one specific sector that's going to be highly and heavily impacted by AI in the next decade or so: education. We have already started using AI-based technologies for automated grading. There will be more in homework help, and then teaching. This is the only game in town right now. And if you say to people in Silicon Valley and many others in the technology world that you think these technologies are bad, they will accuse you of being a Luddite. But in fact, I don't think it's a Luddite to say that this is not the only type of technology that's feasible. 40 years ago, Isaac Asimov noted something other people have said also, but he said it more eloquently. Said, today what people call learning is forced on you. Everyone is forced to learn the same thing on the same day at the same speed in class. Well, that's not the only way of learning. But 40 years ago when Asimov wrote, or 50 years ago, it wasn't easy to do anything else. We just didn't have the resources and the technologies to do anything else. Today we do. You can actually use AI and digital technologies to identify which students have difficulty, which type of material in real time, see their strengths and weaknesses, and do much more individualized teaching. There's plenty of evidence that individualized teaching leads to much, much better outcomes, especially for lower socioeconomic status children. And the technology for developing, or the know-how for developing technologies for that type of individualized teaching is completely available. But nobody is doing it. Why is nobody doing it? Well, two problems. First of all, exactly the reason why I'm advocating this is because it will create labor demand. It will create a lot of opportunities for much more meaningful teaching jobs. But in most countries, in most places, schools want to economize on teaching. They think teachers are too expensive or bothersome, they can have demands and so on. So much better to replace them by algorithms. So if you created a technology that did that, the demand for it may not be high unless there's a recognition that this is going to be very useful and the two schools have the resources. But even a bigger problem, even if the demand was forthcoming, I don't think the technologies would be forthcoming. Why not? Well, if you go and talk to people in Silicon Valley, or as you are at MIT or at Stanford or at Caltech, and you talk to hundreds of students every year flocking to computer science, engineering, big data courses, that's not what they find cool. They have completely internalized the values of Silicon Valley, which says that the really cool thing is to do AI research in order to reach human parity, not to complement humans, but to replace humans. The whole sort of Turing test, which is, I think, exactly the wrong way to think about machine intelligence, has completely suffused them that what you want to do is exceed humans in certain tasks. But as I've outlined, actually a very good way of using it for both productivity and for labor demand and for equality would be not to replace humans, but to complement humans. So I think it is really a defining imperative for the workforce, for inequality, for democracy, and for the developing world to really redirect technological change. But even if you agree with me up to this point, you might be pessimistic that it is possible to change the direction of technological change. Who can convince firms to do something different, even if that different thing was feasible? Well, I'll actually make one more argument. It's actually quite easy to redirect technological change. Let me give you an example: renewable energy. 20 years ago, even though I think most people who looked at the literature or understood the literature knew that climate change was an existential threat against this planet, there wasn't much you could do, because renewable energy was prohibitively costly, more than 10 times the cost of fossil fuel energy. But today, lo and behold, 20% of Europe's energy demand comes from renewables. More than 11% in the US comes from renewables. And renewables are actually cost competitive with fossil fuel. In fact, cheaper than fossil fuel if you remove the subsidies to fossil fuel in almost all tasks. Only heavy fuels cannot be done with renewables. So how did we achieve this? We achieved this with a minimal amount of subsidies to green technologies, some regulation, again, minimal amount of regulation, much less than we should have done, no global carbon tax, and a little bit of support, pressure from consumers. So imagine what the world could have achieved if it actually had adopted a consistent policy of supporting one type of technology, renewables, at the expense of fossil fuels. That's absolutely what we have to do for combating climate change. And I think combating excessive automation is almost as big a challenge and requires the same type of redirection of technological change. Let me stop here, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Acemoglu, for such an interesting talk. It has been really fascinating to understand issues arising from automation, like inequality and excessive automation, as well as at the end learn about non-conventional ways in which we should be using new technology, like AI, to benefit people. So I'd love to move on to the Q&A portion of today. I'd first like to give everyone the opportunity to ask a question live. So if you would like to do that, please raise your virtual hand and I can unmute you.
So Maha, if no one, first of all, yes, the students should intervene, but if no one wants to talk, I will ask some first questions. You decide, because I can't see from here who wants to ask.
Yeah, you can start whilst we give people the time to raise their hands.
So Daron, I mean, first, a simple clarifying question. What do you mean by perceived labor cost? You had a slide on that, and I couldn't get it. Then more not clarifying question. You talked about 4 reasons for excessive automation, but could you go a bit deeper than that? I mean, why? What is at the root of those 4 reasons? The third question is then, in terms of political economy, since you're the expert of political economy, what would be the role of the government in going one direction rather than another? And then I have another question related to Keynes, but maybe I postpone it to later. Thank you.
I would love to hear the question about Keynes too, but well, your first 2 questions are actually linked. And I was trying to be too clever with that perceived cost, and perhaps that didn't work. But what I meant by the perceived cost is that take a scenario in which the cost of leisure for 1 more hour of work is $10 or £10. Is that necessarily the price that firms perceive when they make their automation decisions? And there could be 3 reasons for those being different. And I was trying to put all of them in the perceived cost. And for my purposes, they're actually working all in similar ways, but they are very distinct and they would have distinct solutions. One is labor market imperfections. The opportunity cost of labor may be $10, but if there's bargaining, you maybe have to pay $15 to labor. If that's the case, the perceived value is $15, because if you can automate, you save $15, not the $10. But from a social planner's point of view, who's utilitarian, the right price is $10. So then there will be excessive automation. The second is the tax system. So if there are taxes, automation decisions are made on the basis of after-tax prices. So again, let's take the $10 as the opportunity cost of labor. But now let's put 25% tax, as is in the US, then the perceived cost is $12.50. What about capital? Well, capital gets taxed at less than 4%, but I rounded that down to 0, so the capital curve did not shift. But if it shifts less than 25%, the conclusion will be the same. The final one is the hardest one, but I think it also fits into that, and it's also the hardest one for which I can, in terms of providing evidence, but I think it's completely first order. Of course, people can disagree with me because I don't have hard evidence for it. But I think even absent these issues, the ideology of Silicon Valley and the tech sector means that they are going to prioritize automation. That's what really gets people going in Silicon Valley. That's not a manna from heaven. It's not people's preferences when they were born. That's how they've been educated. Those are the values that we teach people in computer science classes. That's what they hear from other people in the tech sector. You know, you have to reach human parity. You have to show your smarts by outperforming humans. That's the really end. The humans are troublesome. Now, you might say, well, you know, in a profit maximizing world, shouldn't the thing that's really most profitable be the technologies that, you know, are most efficient? Well, not necessarily. First of all, most companies make zero money before they become 5 billion valuation. So with venture capital, it's all expectations about which kind of technologies are going to get developed. And many companies then really adopt the technologies that are produced without much regards for what the alternatives would have produced in terms of productivity gains. So I think the reason why today, it's a remarkable number. Today, we have 5 times as many patents in the US as we did in 1980. And despite that, and many of these patents come from electronics and computers. Despite that, we are producing the least amount of productivity growth. I think it is really related to the fact that we are adopting a lot of digital technologies, AI included, that are not helping with productivity. Finally, on the political economy. Actually, I had 2 slides on political economy at the end, which I skipped because I wanted to open it up for Q&A. I think it's a very difficult problem. If you had a benevolent government, even then it's a difficult problem to redirect technological change because it requires measurement. You know, what's the equivalent of the carbon content, etc. But in fact, in most instances, governments benefit from excessive automation because some of those tools also empower governments. So there is a meeting of minds between Google and the Chinese Communist Party, I would claim. So they both like using a huge amount of data to control whoever is their target audience. For Google, their consumers; for the Chinese Communist Party, their quote-unquote citizens. So I think the political economy makes this more complicated. But again, I think I wouldn't like to be fatalistic. I think if people sort of understood the dangers ahead, I think there's a lot that can be done.
Thank you for your answer. We have a question from Evans Mantas, who asks, is there any prediction on the impact of AI on labour positions reduction? So given the fact that during COVID-19, the AI innovation was accelerated to reduce the human footprint on everyday tasks, this is in order to keep the world running. But who running the world for whom, and how should that be considered?
Thank you, Evan. Well, I think there are 2 kinds of technological changes that have accelerated during COVID-19. And one is exactly going in the direction of automation, especially in the hospitality sector. You have a lot more automation because there were labor shortages. And if you look in the US, the only sector in which wages are exceeding inflation is the hospitality sector. And it's been subject to a lot of automation, and there's a lot more planned automation. You know, that you can look at that as glass half full, half empty. Many of those were not good jobs, but on the other hand, those were the jobs that, you know, U.S. economy created in abundance. So if they go away and we don't create any other jobs, is probably worse than the alternative. The other kind of technologies are actually not automation technologies, which again shows the capabilities that we have to do other things, like remote work. Remote work is the opposite, in my opinion, of automation technologies, because it creates a lot of new tasks, a lot of new different ways in which people can contribute to work. It increases human capabilities a lot. Zoom is, I think, the ultimate anti-automation technology. It augments humans. And recent work by Nick Bloom, Steve Davis, and one of their co-authors, I forget his name now on top of my head, shows that there has been a very rapid acceleration of work from home technologies. Almost all of them are, in my vocabulary, would be examples of new tasks.
Thank you. We have a question from Finn, who firstly thanks you for your talk. And then he says, he was wondering if you could clarify the reasons why in recent years we are not seeing new tasks for labour balance the loss of labour tasks to capital that we had in the past.
Yeah, I think it is exactly related to the business model of big tech and the subsidies we have for automation. So new tasks, first of all, require that humans are viewed as central to the production process. You're creating them for humans. If humans are becoming less and less important, then you don't necessarily need the new tasks. Second, it really is about where you put your resources. Today, Google is much more valuable than General Motors was at its heyday. But it employs less than 1/10 of the workforce of General Motors. It is indicative of their approach, which is very, very much, it's from the beginning, you want to use algorithms for a lot of things that could have otherwise been done by humans. But now that technology is throughout the economy dominant, so that creates a very difficult problem for new tasks. So let me actually make one more comment on this, because it's a very important question. So there's no necessity that new tasks should come in exactly the same industries that undergo the automation. So I'm certainly not saying that every sector should be creating new tasks. That's far from the case. You want the economy to automate, but at the same time create compensating, counterbalancing new tasks. So during the last few decades of the 19th century and the first 4 decades of the 20th century, in the US, agriculture went from more than 50% of employment to less than 2% of employment. In Britain, it was less of a transition because it had already declined as a fraction of the workforce. So that was a huge automation. And I'm not saying that you should create new tasks in agriculture because you had the major automation there. No, in fact, if you look at the US economy, it created a staggering number of new tasks, but they came in manufacturing, all the design jobs, engineering jobs, maintenance jobs, clerical jobs in manufacturing that basically did not exist. And it came in many of the service industries that were growing very rapidly at the time. It also came in some new industries that were already in Germany and very dormant in the US, and they started growing very rapidly. So in some sense, we should have been creating a lot of new tasks in places like education, healthcare, entertainment. And we haven't done enough, and I think that's exactly where you see the footprints of big tech.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. So just been submitted in now from Marthy, who asks, you've just mentioned actually patents, but what is the role of current intellectual property system in the concentration of technology ownership and its impact on social inequality? And if necessary, how could the system be improved for better social outcomes?
Great question. I unfortunately don't have a very clear answer. So I certainly believe that the patent system is a necessary evil. I don't think we can completely get rid of patents, because providing intellectual property for innovations has been important in history, and I think it will be important in some domains in the future. On the other hand, you are absolutely right that the patent system has been gamed, and it has been one of the tools via which a few companies have become dominant. And so how to change that system so that you maintain part of the patent system, but you prevent it from being both a source of artificial monopoly power and a war chest against competitors. I think that's really hard. But if you don't do that, you're going to be very difficult. If anybody comes up with a new phone design that is much better in, for example, as a tool for individuals in their work, well, they would have to clear thousands of patents that are held by Samsung and Google and Apple. So that makes it really, really non-profitable unless you have a big war chest yourself. So that really requires some reforms, but I think the devil's in the details. So that's why I don't have like a crisp, very, very crisp answer to how to do that.
Thank you. And just really quickly, I've seen that Benjamin's got a live question. So,
hi, Professor. Thank you very much for your talk. So my question would be if you think that we could ever reach a point in automation efficiency where, say, the marginal cost could almost get to zero, and where perhaps focusing our attention on socializing the technology and appropriating it and using it for better for the social good is better than actually focusing our efforts on creating new tasks.
Great question. Thank you, Benjamin. That's a very important question. And absolutely, there is a very vocal contingent of people in the US, and I presume also in Europe, who believe that these technological changes, perhaps they are in their infancy today, but ultimately are going to bring us, unimaginable abundance. Machines are going to be so good that they can do everything better than humans, and at some point they can program themselves even better than humans, and they can create better copies of themselves. At that point, you reach what Wenje called singularity, where you reach infinite output and boundless abundance, and then who cares about whether you have a job or not? Well, first of all, I think that would still be a dystopic world, in my opinion. I think humans without having a purpose would be humans in trouble. But also, my reading is that absolutely there is no way we're going to get there. Not in my lifetime, not in my children's lifetime, not in probably your children's lifetime. I think what goes under the name of artificial general intelligence is much closer to artificial stupidity, has no way of reasoning in any capable way. It's all a gimmick. Humans are so much better than machines in almost everything. But of course, you can manipulate humans, you can monitor humans, and you can take certain things away from humans using data and using machines. But that doesn't mean that these machines are going to be really good at most things that humans do. So when I talk of automation, I should have clarified that, Benjamin, and thank you for bringing it up. I never meant to say that automation is going to be such that humans are going to be jobless, because most of the things that humans do are actually completely beyond what machines can do. And it will remain that way. If you look at the current approach to machine intelligence, it is a very, 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 very peculiar approach that can do certain prediction tasks in stable environments, but it really looks nothing like intelligence. It really has no ability to reason. It has no ability to generalize learning or knowledge across tasks. So I think we're really very, very far. Perhaps in 300 years time, 400 years time, there might be more biology-based ways of controlling or programming machines that might change that, but I don't see the current path taking us there anytime soon. But that's, again, is a contested view. There will be very smart people from Silicon Valley who will violently disagree with me and probably think that I'm no smarter than a machine for saying this. But anyway, that's my view.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that question, that brings us to the end of the event. I just wanted to say a big, big thank you from the Economist Society and the UCL Department of Economics to Professor Acemoglu for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and speak with us today. I'm sure I speak for everyone here when I say it's been an incredibly insightful event, and honestly an honour to have you speak for us at UCL. So we hope you enjoyed the event. Also, thank you so much to Professor Guarino for being with us here today and giving such a fitting introduction for our speaker. And finally, last but not least, thank you to all our attendees for being such a great audience and for giving such good questions. I hope you enjoyed today's talk, and I would just like to remind you that we do have more events coming up. So tomorrow, Dame Carol Proper will be giving a talk on competition and choice in healthcare at 5 p.m. Both tomorrow and Saturday's events will be held in person on UCL campus, so make sure you don't miss out. For more content and information regarding our events, and to get your tickets for the last 2 days of the conference, follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and we really hope to see you there. So thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Professor Acemoglu and Professor Guarino.
Just one more word from me. Thank you to the Economist Society for organizing this wonderful event and all the others that you have mentioned. I'm really proud of you. And thanks, Daron, also on behalf of the Department of Economics. We hope to see you here in London soon, and I'll email you my question about it.
Thank you, Antonio. Thanks very much for the great questions and the hospitality. Thanks, Maha, and the whole Economic Society for organizing it.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.